cloud native. It was going to be after dark, but then all of a sudden we found ourselves at noon. And I'm joined today by my co-conspirator Bridget, and also our special guest today is Jessie, who I'll let introduce herself right now. So tell us a little bit about yourself, like what you're doing, what you're excited about.
Yeah, so recently I've been working on containers, some for Docker for a few years, and then most recently for Mesosphere, specifically with regard to securing clusters. But yeah, right now I'm just like kind of working on fun things to teach people about how to use containers securely, which is kind of like a small game that I made so far, and then maybe things built on top of that.
Oh yeah, your contain.af.
The thing I like about your talks are, one, your authentic fascination with this technology that like just kind of comes through, how passionate you are about, and it's like very authentic, and then also how you tend to demystify the technology and like make it accessible to the people. So the talk you're going to give, and you're going to give some other talks before that, but you're going to give a talk at our conference in Vegas for Spring One platform, and you're going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's coming, like the features that aren't really available in the kernel now that are going to enable some of this security stuff. So why don't you just give us a teaser about some of the stuff that you're thinking about and how you see that evolving.
Yeah, so right now I'm like really getting towards helping with rootless containers, which most people tend to think is running as non-root inside the container, but it's actually starting the process that you're creating the container with as a non-root user. And it is totally possible, but there are some walls we hit with regard to C groups, which things like Chrome, which already has a sandbox that is really well known, doesn't even use because of these problems. So kind of the features that we're trying to get into the kernel, or at least like watching as they happen, are with regard to the new C group namespace, which came out and doesn't do kind of what we want, but maybe in the future it could.
So maybe back up a little bit and explain the actual problem they're trying to solve. Like right now, you can't run a container if you're not root, or you can't start and stop like the processes in these C groups. So kind of like back up just a little bit and explain what the problem is and like how this will solve it.
Yeah, so the problem is like the way people like run containers, they're probably most well known today is with the Docker daemon, and it's running as root. And they may not even realize that because of this whole Docker group that you add things to, but that's also root. So even if you're a member of the Docker group, you basically have sudo access to everything. So that's a problem in that multi-different users on the same machine should have their own user accounts running things. They shouldn't all be contacting this daemon that's running as root.
Yeah, I'd imagine some of the problems that come into play with that are things like, mounting volumes in or whatever. It's like, oh, you have the permission to grab everything. That's fantastic.
Yeah. The famous, like, let me mount root in to this other subvolume and then chroot back into it inside a container.
So everything is owned all the time, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the things that you're hoping to see evolve and that you're going to talk about for the group is essentially leveraging the permissions and the security that's in the users and group systems of Linux already, but just being able to apply that to your containers.
Yeah, because people are like even building fancier things on top of it to get this same behavior, and it's not something that's necessary if we can just use the like PAM controls that are there today. Especially like even with regard to volumes and not just mounting in root, if you're going to be writing things back through like a shared volume, they should be owned by that user that started the process and not by a root user, which is what happens with Docker today.
So what kind of implications does this have for people who are, like, say, running containers in production, maybe multi-tenancy?
So that would be really great for them, but it also depends on how they define multi-tenancy, because at least what I've seen at Mesosphere is people have various different definitions. It's like, am I going to share this Mesos master? Am I going to just have VMs for separate tenants, which is really the way that you should be doing it today. But in the future with rootless containers, I really think that you can start sharing VMs between tenants.
So now I've seen you do some demos. So you mentioned, and Schaefer was mentioning, that there's some things you can do today. Like, what can you do right now that makes containers safer?
Yeah, so you can actually run containers rootless today if you just ignore the whole control groups thing, and you'll get like a sandbox-like experience like you get with Chrome, which is really good, and that's why the Chrome sandbox is so famous. But just it is nice to have that extra control over the resources of like CPU, memory, block I/O. So that would be like the perfect world. But today, yeah, you can do basically everything, and that's like a patch into at least Run C is going to be merged soon that does that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to explore, or that's kind of a teaser? That's like the appetizer, but there's like what drives you to be kind of into this stuff? Like what made you first get into the containers and the kernel and all the stuff that like you're obviously an expert on it, but like if someone wanted to do this thing you're doing or like learn the stuff you're doing, what would your advice be for them to get started?
Yeah, it's super weird because actually like my whole web development career started in like those crazy scrolling web apps that you see. Specifically the ones that are used on Facebook to steal people's data. So like I feel like I was like an evil person.
I've also worked in ad tech. We can all do penance for this.
Yeah. So after that, like I joined a startup, and they were doing like web hosting for data scientists. So we had like R and Python LXC containers that would just be spun up at random when they would push their like data model to our service. And then we switched over to Docker like super early on, and then I got like super into it because I like started installing like Linux on my Mac. I don't know, there was like this weird like switch in my brain that this was like the coolest. And then the whole like containers on the desktop thing, like I honestly, if I had all the time in the world, I would create my own desktop OS, which is also why I think like rootless containers will help with that, because like you shouldn't be running your desktop applications as sudo. And there's a lot of people actually on the GNOME project working to make this happen as well, so that this could be actually be like a genuinely good Linux desktop experience.
Well, and I imagine one of the problems this solves is like, okay, we're doing this with Hangouts. I don't know about you, but Hangouts makes my laptop just go like completely bonkers in terms of all the usage. Like, I feel like, just every Chrome tab is eating up so much memory. And I've seen you talk before about how you solve that. Totally.
So, yeah, and the way that I solve it is actually Chrome could help a little bit with this. There is like this small patch that they need to make. But so I use control groups to control the memory of Chrome, but it will actually start killing tabs once it starts to overextend its privileges. But the way Chrome actually reads how much memory that it can use is through like proc meminfo, which has the entire memory of my host. It doesn't have just what it can get. It's like it's a non-preferred way to do it, I would say. So hopefully they fix that. And then I don't think that it would even need to kill the tabs. It would just know that it can't use anymore.
Well, and that idea of having access to the whole memory of the host, that's where it starts getting a little nerve-wracking when you start thinking about multi-tenancy. You're like, a better way to control this would probably be safer, right?
Totally.
So that definitely gave me more insight into like your path to get here. What's your advice for someone who wanted to learn more about this or kind of get into the same stuff you're into?
I would say just like through breaking things and then fixing it, which is what I do all the time with my Linux computer. I mean, as we saw last night, I had to fix my video camera so that we could do this. Yeah, that like has taught me more than anything else. And you kind of have to have that like joy of actually fixing it though. Like sometimes it is really stressful and I'm like, oh, I just really wish I could get some work done, but like this thing is not behaving. But at least for me, like there is an a limit to where the fun is before I start getting mad, which is like probably a few hours. So I have a high tolerance.
So your advice for everyone is build up your pain tolerance.
Yeah, and start running Linux on the desktop.
Run Linux on the desktop and experience the joy.
Yeah.
That is fixing your driver for your camera.
Yeah.
But there's also something else there too, which is I think really healthy. I'm not sure about Linux on the desktop. I'm like, oh, I actually did that at work for years. I remember spending a lot of time fighting with drivers. But the that experience of tinkering, of being, having that joy, having that fun of, yeah, we're learning about this stuff because we need to, but also because we want to.
Totally. Yeah. No, tinkering is like my favorite word actually. In my first like technical interview for any company ever, the person who interviewed me was like, I can just tell that you're a tinkerer. And ever since then I've been like, yeah.
Nice.
That's awesome. So we're looking forward to seeing you at Springland Platform in Vegas, August 1st through 4th. I think that's a good teaser. That gives us a nice kind of human interest about everything you think and everything you're excited about. Is there anything you want to give us sort of like a last word of wisdom, parting shot to the audience before we end it?
Come to my talk. It'll be fun.
It will be fun.
Totally.
And we'll see you in Vegas.
Yeah.
Cheers.